My name is Susan Messino. I'm here tonight. My family's from Pittsfield for multiple generations on both sides, my husband as well. So we really are very interested in this area and its long-term future. Currently, I'm a professor at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and my research and teaching is focused on brain health. So both things that help your brain and avoiding things that hurt your brain. And I'm also very interested in a number of different community efforts, and I'm one of the co-founders of Friends of Peru State Forest. Tonight we're here to talk about the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership, rural economic development from a public policy perspective. So all of us here care about our rural environment, we care about job opportunities in this area, and we care about our taxes and what they're spent on. So as you may know, there are 21 towns in the partnership, and 19 out of the 21 towns signed a letter indicating support to put legislation forward. And we're here to present some additional information. We have some members of the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership Advisory Board here. We have Janet Sinclair, who also co-founded Concerned Citizens of Franklin County, and she's currently on her Board of Health in Buckland. And
Conservation Commission.
Oh, sorry, formerly on the Board of Health, currently on the Conservation Commission. And just a couple of details. Tonight what we're going to do is tape the formal part of the presentation, but we're going to turn the cameras off during the question and answer. We're going to tape the formal part. It's kind of an educational presentation. And then most of the people here are from the select boards and boards of health that we invited, so you can feel free to ask questions and chat during the question and answer portion. I did put some notepads and pens on the table, but we would be happy to send you the full presentation that we're sharing tonight, so don't feel that you need to write down everything. So tonight we're delighted to present for you Michael Kellett. He's the Executive Director of Restore the North Woods. He's going to outline the partnership plans, review some highlights of the legislation, and discuss public policy issues related to its goals. Mr. Kellett earned a BA in Political Science from the University of Michigan, and after co-founding Restore in 1992, he developed the original proposal for a 3.2 million acre Maine Woods National Park and Reserve, which laid the groundwork for the designation of the Katahdin Woods. In 2009 to 2010, he served on the Citizen Advisory Committee to Massachusetts DCR's Forest Futures Visioning process, which led to the expansion of State Forest Reserve. He's previously worked for the Wilderness Society. He's focused on forest planning, federal wilderness and national parks, and other public land issues. He has a special interest in how public policies and programs affect public health, forest ecosystems and biodiversity, and climate change. So please help me welcome Mr. Kellett.
I live in Massachusetts, although most of the work I've done has been in Maine, actually. And I've not really paid that much attention to Massachusetts forest issues until relatively recently, when I got involved with the DCR Forest Futures process. And I've paid more and more attention to Massachusetts forests because, for a lot of reasons, the same reason you folks are here. And I realized I needed to try to take care of things in my home state more and only focus away. So, but I've been involved in processes before that are not that different from the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership. I was involved in writing the legislation for the Northern Forest Lands Study and Northern Forest Lands Council, which were back in 1990, which looked at 26 million acres across northern New England and the Adirondacks. I was involved in that whole process, and it was involved with a lot of the same issues that we're talking about here. It was a lot of towns in northern New England, northern New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, and the Adirondacks, and same questions, same issues in a lot of ways. And so I when I saw the legislation for the partnership and saw the plan for the partnership and so forth, it started me thinking about all the things that I had learned and then I started looking more closely, and I saw a lot of things I had questions about. And one of the things that occurred to me, and in talking with folks who live out here, I live in Westford, Mass, so I'm not right in the area, but is that a lot of people don't really know that much about the partnership. There's been a lot of information out there which I think is either inaccurate or misunderstood or whatever. And I think I'm sort of giving a second opinion, I would say, on the whole thing. And I've read legislation before. I've helped to write it, so I looked at the bill that was just introduced in Congress. That sort of obviously creates an urgency for folks to think about this. So I'm not here to tell folks what to think or tell you what to do, but it seemed like it might be a good idea. I was invited to come, and I agreed that it might be a good idea to just talk about the issues from my experience and questions that I have. And folks can ask me questions or tell me what you think or so forth, and I hope it's of some use to you. So, and I'm going to, yeah. Yeah, so you need to, uh-oh. Yeah, I need a remote. I don't have
Screen over.
Maybe somebody's finger could work for you.
Well, that's the plan, but it's reaching.
It's got to go beep and
Sorry, folks. This is low tech. Okay, great. Okay, so we need to hit that one forward. Yeah, sorry. So, what is the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership? The partnership started in 2013. There was a number of groups in the state. Agencies got together and thought it might be a good idea to try to get money to bring in the U.S. Forest Service and the state, and working with them to put together legislation that could end up with some kind of special national designation for 21 towns, originally 20 towns, but 21 towns in Franklin and Berkshire County. That's how it started. And then those players went out and started talking to the towns and asking them if they would be interested in getting involved, and got a lot of the towns to support it. I guess most of the towns have signed off on a letter of support. So where we are now is the legislation has been introduced. Could you go to the next? There's been legislation introduced into the state legislature that would statutorily create this partnership as a state program. And so, and the goals are sustainable forest management, forest lands conservation, economic development, visitor information programs, social and fiscal sustainability, and a partnership between the town's number of regional organizations, the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and the Forest Service. I'm not going to read all the text in all of these, but these are the most important things. And then what it did is this legislation creates a board which carries out the plan that the partnership puts together. And the plan, so the plan, next, go to the next. The plan has been released. This is the plan. And the major goals of the plan are similar to what is in the legislation. The legislation was written by people involved in the plan, basically. So now the plan is out. We've got the legislation. The plan is being implemented already, but the legislation would formalize this at the state level. So, next. The problem is there are a lot of the goals of the partnership, which are based on things that I don't think are legitimate. They're mistaken, they're misunderstood. For example, sustainable forestry, there is no scientific definition of sustainable forestry. There's no accepted definition. the state itself has in its state plan has 3 definitions listed, and it says it's an evolving concept. This is from the Woodlands Partnership Advisory Committee, which is the entity that guides the partnership's plans and policies and programs right now. And this was the discussion. Is there any thought about sustainable forest management? It's just the definition of what we say it is. Oh, really? And then somebody says there's no definition of sustainable forestry in any state law or regulation, which is true. There's no real definition. There's a couple things that call it sustainable forestry, but it's really just best management practices, which are the baseline, short of destroying the forest, that's best management practices. So that's not sustainable forestry. So we are supposedly, this law will supposedly institute and maintain sustainable forestry, but there is no definition of sustainable forestry. Next, please. And the plan completely ignores climate change. The plan talks about, and the legislation, they completely ignore climate change. The legislation that mentions carbon once, I believe, in the context of a laundry list. Here, the partnership plan says sustainable forestry can increase resilience to climate change and increase the ability of forests to store carbon. That's not the scientific consensus nowadays. That's old science. The new science, Bill Mohawk from Tufts University just expressed it really well in a report that just came out, what the new science is, which is standing forests are the only way we can remove enough carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to meet the Paris Accords standards of keeping global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius this century. And the fact is, the more we log, the more forests we remove, and the more that reduces carbon sequestration and adds carbon, greenhouse gases to the air. So none of this is discussed in the plan or in the legislation. In fact, the plan assumes that logging is fine in terms of climate change. Now, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm against all logging everywhere. What I'm saying is we need to realize the impacts. If we're going to, and I would argue that we need to, and this isn't in the plan either, is that we need to do something about reducing demand so we're not wasting so much, we're not using so much. And we recycle like 20% of wood products. We recycle about 40-something% of paper. And we waste huge amounts of stuff. So it's not like we've got this incredible demand that isn't being met, and we're up to the wall using it super efficiently. We're not. Next, please. The plan and the legislation don't talk about biodiversity, really. They mention it, but it doesn't really address it. The Biomap 2 that the state of Massachusetts did with the Nature Conservancy talks about forest interior habitat as widely recognized as critically important and becoming increasingly scarce. And it talks about the negative effects of fragmentation, and you get species like more deer, more mice, and more deer ticks when you create more edge and early successional forest. And create more Lyme disease. So it's not something you just ignore if the state has this as their priority, but instead the plan talks about more logging as being good for the forest, good for habitat, good for wildlife, and just the species that benefit from cutting forests are not endangered species. Most of them are very common species, and when you cut the forest, you destroy habitat for a lot of other species, most of which are in trouble because we hardly have any old forest in the state, as you no doubt know. Most of the forests in the state are 70 years or younger, and forests in Massachusetts, trees can grow to 150 or even 300 years old if you're talking about white pines. So there's a desperate need for more interior habitat, but the plan would actually make that problem worse based on what I'm reading. Next. The plan talks about a demonstration forest. Having worked on forestry stuff for 30 years, that's the perpetual thing is if only we could just teach people how to do forestry right, everything would be great, except that's not the problem. The problem is short-term profit. People either need to or want to make money sooner rather than later, and they cut the forest down sooner rather than later. It's not because we don't know about forestry. Gifford Pinchot knew how to do good forestry 100 years ago. So, number one, and yet the plan talks about a demonstration forest. In reality, DCR's forests, the Woodlands, which are 122,000 acres, right in their plan, they talk about how all of them are demonstration forests and all of their timber sales are going to be demonstrations of excellent and sustainable forestry. So the question is it really a good way to spend money for another demonstration forest? Just asking. Next question. And wood heat, there's been a lot of, I've seen in the newspapers where the partnership plan has been accused of promoting wood biomass heat and promoting the construction of a pellet factory in the region. And it's been vigorously denied by spokespeople for the plan, the partnership, as well as members of the legislature who are supporting the legislation. Yet, if you read the plan, it's in it. This is the major jobs thing in the entire plan, is to build a pellet facility. And the state of Massachusetts has already committed $350,000 on studying this issue to see how feasible it might be to build a pellet mill. And it's number 6 out of 13 priorities in the plan. So it's just not true that the fine line that's used is, oh well, the bill that implements this doesn't mention pellet mills or biomass. Well, what it does, as you may remember, it says we hereby okay the plan. So whatever the Partnership Advisory Committee creates, that's the plan, and this is in the plan. So this is totally, the legislation doesn't do anything to prevent this. It doesn't list it because it doesn't need to. It's like a lot of legislation. It's broad and general, and it says we hereby set this thing loose, and here we go. And so anyway, pellet factory, plant, whatever you want to call it, that's one of the major parts of the plan. Next. And there are a lot of problems in my mind and with a lot of other people about that. There are serious health impacts with wood heat. There's a study that's being funded by the state that's going to cost $60,000 to $70,000 to evaluate basically things that have been evaluated over and over again that we already know, and it's like insanity where you do the same thing several times and hope for a different outcome. But the reality is, we know what the impacts of wood pellets and wood heat are, and they're not good. Next one, please. The American Lung Association doesn't like wood heat. They wrote a letter regarding an effort to install biomass wood heating systems in Mohawk High School and Sanderson Academy, and they were strongly opposed to it. They pointed out that emissions from biomass include harmful particle pollution, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, and they are carcinogenic. There was just an article in the Boston Globe today about a barbecue place in Cambridge, and the neighbors are so concerned about the wood smoke that people are fighting it and they're moving and so forth. And this is just a barbecue place in Cambridge. Next. This comes from a PowerPoint that was done by this group, NESCOM, which is a regional entity that's concerned with air quality. And it includes Massachusetts and all the rest of the Northeast states. So this is a big entity looking at the whole region. They looked at wood heat, specifically pellets, wood pellets, and assessed the literature, the studies, and so forth to see what exactly is going on with the market and what are the standards and so forth for wood pellets. They found that there's no regulatory fuel standard for pellets. No voluntary, it's only voluntary. The Pellet Fuel Institute, which is an industry group, voluntarily controls it. That doesn't make me feel real confident. And that all the pellets are called premium, just because it's like natural, all natural food. It doesn't mean anything. Next. They analyzed pellets. They bought some random wood pellets. Now these are things that people are burning in their houses and in schools and in commercial buildings. They found chromium, copper, arsenic, lead, mercury in the pellets. So you burn that stuff goes into your air and you breathe it. And your kids breathe it and the students breathe it. Next. They found some pellets were almost black because they didn't know if it was black liquor from paper mills, which is really toxic stuff, or whether it's ash or what, because of course there's no real standard, so they don't know exactly what's going on with these pellets, but they look pretty bad. Next, please. They found elevated elements that I just mentioned, and they don't know exactly how they got there, but they have a number of theories as to potential reasons why this stuff got into the pellets. All things that are pretty hard to control, and nobody's really tracking this or keeping it in tow. So, yes. So their conclusions are basically the standards we have now are not likely to identify contamination. We need appropriate analysis. We need better understanding. There are all these elevated elements, and there's significant policy issues. This is what they came up with. So it doesn't make me feel good about pellets. Next. These are the emissions that wood heat. Wood pellet heat, which is more efficient than regular biomass heat, so this is about as efficient as it will get. This is the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted by these various types of fuels. So the worst thing for worsening climate change is wood pellets in terms of spewing out carbon dioxide of all the fuels. We don't have coal in there, but it's worse than coal too, but nobody seriously is going to compare anything to coal much anymore because it's off the table, but these are other fuels that people are using. Next, please. And then if you look at PM 2.5 small particulates, which are extremely bad for your health, again, the state sapphire maximum for supposedly renewable energy is 1,500 times more emissions of these large particulates, or small particulates, than natural gas or oil. The Mohawk High School study found they were emitting 3,500 times more, and or do emit 3,500 times more, and this state-of-the-art boiler claims 830 times more. There's no one standard because various companies and various entities have different standards that they claim are the number. Yes?
Yes, this study, the Mohawk High School study, that was a proposed pellet boilers for the schools, and what happened was they did hire a consulting company to look at what the emissions were going to be, and so this is the information that we got from them. The state-of-the-art Okefin, right, Terry, a special boiler that they're planning on installing was like significantly less polluting than some other boilers and less than what the Sapphire program requires. But still, even at its very best, this is what we found, is it's putting out 830 times more particulates. And one of the reasons why we find this significant is because the state is spending right now $60,000 on a health study to see how many particulates are going to end up in the atmosphere as a result of burning burning wood pellets. And so what they're doing is they're comparing, they have 8 different sites. I haven't seen the actual, I've just heard about the study, I haven't seen the specs of it. 8 different sites, 8 different facilities, 8 different size facilities, 8 different times of the year where they're going to have a truck that sits out there and measures all the particulates, and somehow it's going to unfactor all the factors that are there. But the thing that's so interesting to me about that is that, how other people do these studies is they know the stack emissions. We know what they are. These are, industry standards. These are EPA numbers. These are just known factors. And to think that something that's putting out 1,500 times more particulates than oil or gas, and to think that that's not going to end up being more air pollution. Actually, the guy who's doing the study thinks that the pellets are going to come out better than oil. When you look at this, it's just, $60,000 study of this is, and the other thing I just want to remind people of when Michael's talking about this stuff, is all the stuff that we're talking about here is all taxpayer funded. We're not even talking about like what should people do. Everything we're talking about here is like what's being used. These are public subsidies that are paying for this program that's being proposed here. This isn't like private money. So just want to remind people of that part.
I think you're distorting. Some of us have been at these Woodland Partnership meetings for 15, 20 times, and there has been discussion of pellets. It's one of 8 or 9 priorities, as you mentioned. It's less than 10%. And I think people might get the wrong impression of thinking that the whole Woodlands Partnership effort is focused on pellets, because it's a very small part of it. The economic reality is there's a glut of pellets around the country. The one in Jaffrey that makes pellets is sitting on a year's supply of pellets. There's really not going to be any future of building a pellet plant here. I just think that people ought to understand there's a lot more in the partnership discussion than just pellets.
Right.
I agree.
We agree with you.
Right.
But
Let's
Jay,
save the
just to be fair, well, save the question later. But just
We can discuss this
We can
during the
discuss
discussion.
Is this time for public comment?
No.
No,
No.
Well, what's going on? Didn't you say that you were going to do the presentation and then there'd be comments after?
yes,
Well-
absolutely.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Please continue, Mike.
yeah. There are also other impacts on forests and climate from wood heat, from cutting trees to burn them for energy. And this is a biomass cut in Wendell State Forest from a few years back, but they all look the same when you do a biomass cut. And the claim is that there's all this extra junk wood and everything that's going to be used, but that's really, it would quickly be gone if we used wood energy for any significant portion of the region's power. So that's really that's a wishful thinking. But the reality is it has a huge impact on the forest because, again, here's from the WUMA study, or WUMA report, which had pretty much the up-to-date science cited. I've read the studies that they cite, and these are legitimate peer-reviewed studies that they're basing this on. Burning trees will accelerate, not reduce carbon emissions, and they also degrade the forest's ability to absorb and store carbon. So you're not only spewing carbon out, but you're also cutting down the trees that could absorb more, and then you got to wait for 100 years for a new forest to grow back, and that's too late. If you know what the Paris Accord calls for, they're saying we've got to rein things in the next decade or two, or this is like all hands on deck for reining in climate greenhouse gases, and we are not acting like it is. The state has the Global Warming Solutions Act, but the state is totally ignoring forests in terms of the emissions. And this is one of the most forested states in the Union, yet forests are totally not being addressed or considered as a part of the solution for climate change. And the partnership report, as well as the legislation, totally ignore this aspect as well. So this has nothing to do with pellets. This has everything to do with cutting down trees for energy. And one other point is the carbon, for a while, advocates of biomass talked about, oh, it's carbon neutral because the trees grow back someday if they don't get clear cut in 20 years. But now, you know, people who actually did the math have figured out that the reality is we've got a carbon deficit because we cut all the forests down and they still haven't begun to, we've got about half the amount of carbon sequestered as in the pre-settlement forest. So we've got a huge deficit. And so when the people say, oh, well, we're cutting less than is growing, that's totally bogus. That's like saying, well, we're bailing out our boat faster than it's leaking. So everything's fine. The reality is it's a disaster. And we need to get serious. The state needs to get serious about this. Massachusetts could be a leader in this. Instead, we're just doing the same old, cut the trees down, burn them, and it just, whether they become pellets or anything else, it's a really bad idea. Next, please. So one of the other priorities is conservation restrictions to protect forest land or keep forest land from being turned into condos and stuff. But the reality is it's only 10% of the partnership's budget. It would only buy, and these are temporary contracts with private landowners we're talking about. Yes, they're temporary. Why are they not temporary?
These are permanent deed restrictions, conservation restrictions. It carries with the deed forever.
Well, how are you going to make sure that happens forever?
It's in the deed. It's a deed.
They can get out of it if they want.
No, they can't.
I think they can, but it's managed property in 61A. But the point is it's only 2,100 acres.
Yeah, the point is, I mean, that's not even the most important point. So say you're right. Say you're right, it's permanent. We're talking about 2,100 acres, 100 acres per town in conservation restrictions. That's nothing. That's nothing. I mean, why are we even talking about such a small amount? It's ridiculous. But it gives the impression that we're conserving all this forest lands, which is one of the top priorities in the partnership plan. Next, please. And the restrictions, I know a little bit about conservation restrictions, and these restrictions basically just pay people to do what they probably would do anyway. And they can, that heavy machinery there is on state property, on a state forest, so that's best management practices. They could do that to their property, what's going on the top there. They can close it off to the public if it's in their restriction. They don't have to allow anybody on their land. The only thing they really can't do is build a Walmart or pave it over or whatever. I mean, basically they can do almost anything else. So the question is, what are we paying for that? There's not a serious threat of large-scale development in western Massachusetts. Sure, around, in Lenox maybe, right around in the beautiful areas. And locally, sure, there are problems, but it's not a widespread problem. Yet the main reason this is supposedly a big benefit is there's this huge development problem. I live in Westford. I've seen real development. Just since I've lived there, I've seen large-scale development. That's not happening in Western Mass. That doesn't mean I'm fine with it. I'm happy to have land trust buying conservation restrictions. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally happy with that. Anything that gives some layer of protection is a good thing. But why is the public paying for basically pretty toothless restrictions? That's my problem. It's not that conservation restrictions are a bad thing. Next, please. And then in terms of the governance of the partnership, it's kind of troubling to me. It's really run by the executive committee. That's who's going to run it. And the executive committee, 3 of the members are paid staff people of agencies and organizations
that's their whole thing, is to make this kind of stuff happen. And then at the most, we'll have 2 town members, town representatives, who are probably part-time volunteers, who this is not all they do. Now, who's going to be calling the shots? I've been involved in a lot of organizations. I've followed a lot of organizations, and I know how that works. You got the Forest Service, you got the state of Massachusetts. That's who's going to run things, and that's not a real partnership, I don't think. Next. So what would the towns, if this is a good deal for the towns, what would they get out of this? There would be a direct payment of $25,000 or maybe $20,000 a year. I've heard both figures. So that means, these are from the advisory committee meeting, once again, and they're talking about, it's only $500,000. This was when it was 20 towns. It's not a large amount. Doesn't seem like the towns are a big winner. Would the payments, would the towns have any conditions? Well, yes. Actually, they can only use it for these narrow things in the partnership. So if there's some, if you want to fix a sewer or whatever, I guess you can't use it for that. You got to use it for what? Maybe road maintenance. You could somehow slip it in there. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like a great deal in terms of direct payments. Next, please. And the payment for landowners for conservation restrictions, again, you're talking about 100 acres per town, not much. And the other part of this is a visitor center. That's a selling point for the partnership. One visitor center for 21 towns. And so here's from another meeting of the advisory committee. Who would own and manage the visitor center? Well, the intent is that the U.S. Forest Service would staff and fund it. So this won't be a town visitor center if they can do what they want. And the U.S. Forest Service would be happy to do this, I'm sure, because they are looking to expand into Massachusetts. They've been doing this, I don't know if folks are aware, they were talking about creating a national forest out here 20 years ago. They had a plan where the U.S. Forest Service wanted to, at that time, think about buying maybe a little land, but it was the same basic concept. So they have not, obviously, they're still interested in that concept. Next, please. I'm not going to read all this, but the point is, where is the funding coming from for the partnership? To me, that's an interesting question. $638,000 from U.S. Department of Agriculture went to the Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation basically for forestry and wood energy. $394,000 from the U.S. Forest Service, including cooperative funding, and I don't know what that is, went to the Massachusetts Forest Alliance, which is a forest industry professional group. The $270,000 then went from Mass DCR to a number of groups, and then $350,000, as I mentioned, went from Mass DOER to this study, which basically talks about how it's meant to promote wood energy and a wood pellet plant. So that's where the money has been going. I don't see a lot of that benefiting the towns myself. I mean, that's up to you folks to decide, but that doesn't seem like it's being spread around. That's a lot of money. That's public money that the citizens of the U.S. and Massachusetts are funding. Yes?
Michael, I just wanted to point out, I mean, part of what in the actual funding for Mass Forest Alliance, that it's a grant, so it has to do the things of the grant. And one of the things of the grant is to be reaching out to these 20 towns here through the Mohawk, known as the Mohawk Trail Woodlands Partnership. So that's all. There is this money targeted for this purpose to these towns through this agency. In case you couldn't see that.
Yeah, so these are the jobs. Job creation was one of the major things. These are the jobs that have been created. I'm not going to read through all this, but the reality is most of the jobs have been for promotion of the Woodland Partnership and paying people $80 an hour to do 50 or 60 meetings that have happened. And a number of people have been paid to attend these meetings and participate and to pay for the venue. And this is to promote the partnership. That's what this is for. So the most jobs that have been created are people promoting the partnership. There's really not much of any other jobs. There's the study. So there have been people paid to do studies to promote wood pellets and wood biomass. So far, 1.03 million, 9.2 FTEs, but they're almost all promotion for the partnership. Next, please. Future job creation, who knows, but this is sort of what is implied and promised in the plan. The only real number that's in the plan is supposedly 15 to 30 jobs a year to work in this wood pellet factory, and obviously would create some jobs temporarily to build it. All the other things are speculative. Wood products manufacturing, visitor center, we don't know, but obviously there could be a couple jobs a year there, full-time jobs, who knows? But that may be paid for, that may be under the U.S. Forest Service, so we don't really know. So the reality is, again, all this money is coming from the federal and state governments, and we don't even know where this is headed in terms of jobs. Jobs are supposed to be like number one here, and yet there's no real, nothing to grade. And I've looked at the bill, I've looked at the plan, I've looked at many of the meeting minutes, and there's no substance in terms of where this is all going in terms of jobs and so forth. Next. Another thing is, it makes you wonder what is this even based on in terms of reading the markets and reading what's needed and so forth. I mean, it talks about a visitor center in the legislation, but in reality they're talking about a forestry center that basically would be promoting forestry, the forest products industry. And if that were paid for by the forest products industry, fine, it's a free country, they could build that, it's fine with me. But this would be paid for with public money. And in reality, in the partnership plan itself, they talk about the fact that $413 million in expenditure in these two counties for visitation and tourism, and that they come because of scenic beauty and so forth. They're not going to come. They don't want to come to see a working forest and see demonstration forestry. I don't know anybody who would come here for that. I just don't get even where that came from. But I mean, again, this is public money we're talking about, including my tax dollars, because even though I don't live in the region, I'm a citizen of the United States and a citizen of Massachusetts. So tax money from people in Boston and so forth would be paying for this and for all of these things. Well, yeah. If it were beneficial, I would be all for it. I would be all for it if I thought it was beneficial. I have no problem with it if it's it's a judgment call. I'm not the final say on this, but next. So the question is, what alternatives might get at some of these goals, which are good goals, that are, the general goals are good goals. I don't have a problem with those. I think people would agree. Those goals in the legislation are all positive things. So who's going to complain about that? But why were other alternatives not pursued that would have gotten to these goals as well as, or better? For example, the Forest Legacy Program, if you look, here's the partnership region. It was left out deliberately by a bunch of organizations which created this Western Mass Forest Legacy area, which can get money from the U.S. from the Forest Service Forest Legacy Program. I helped in the early days of creating that program, so I know how it works. And you have to have a designated area with support of the local people. The goals read almost the same as the goals of the partnership in terms of land protection and forest protection, economics. So why? And this program has spent millions and millions of dollars, and protected more than 16,000 acres of land in Massachusetts. And this includes really expensive land, for example, in Concord. I'm familiar with Esterbrook Woods in Concord, which was purchased. That was very expensive. So here's a program. I mean, this could be overlaid with other things too. So now this, the addition of the area came after the Woodlands partnership was instigated. So that may explain why this wasn't included, but this is an existing program with existing funding, with an existing track record. So I don't get it. Next. Why not put, if we're going to talk about public money, why not put it into alternative types of energy and projects that don't burn trees and worsen climate change? So this is hard to read, but this is a study that was done through UMass. Building retrofits, mass transit, smart grid, wind and solar energy. And I know people here are not thrilled with wind 100%. I'm not either. So, but take the caveats in mind. Those things create huge numbers of jobs and secondary benefits. So why aren't those? Why do we have a pellet factory and not these things, which could create a lot more jobs for that money? That same money could be spent, and that would be a good expensive money. I would be happy to see that. Next, please. And then total employment, again, those things stack up as well. I mean, mass transit, and now granted, that's not going to be a major thing here, but public transportation, there are ways to have public transportation even in rural areas. There's no consideration of that in the partnership plan. I don't see anything. I mean, but even aside from that, building retrofits, all these buildings around here, how energy efficient are they? I mean, I would be totally supportive of that. Next, and I think most people would. Carbon credits. The Woodlands Partnership Plan talks about carbon credits, but there's nothing. There's no, I don't see any, maybe there's been some secret talk about it, but there's nothing recorded in the meeting minutes. There's nothing in the plan. Carbon credits would be a great idea. Pay people to keep their forests standing. I would be happy to see that. Have conservation restrictions that are no forest logging conservation restrictions. That I could get behind. That would be fine. I would see that as a good thing. And there are probably lots of landowners who are not dying to cut their trees. So they would be able to access these funds. And they talk about a couple of pilot projects. There's a huge project in Maine that was done. Appalachian Mountain Club did a project on land they own in Maine. So it's doable. It's totally doable. Next. So why not, if you really are interested in tourism and getting federal involvement and support, getting expertise, putting the area on the map, why not something like a Berkshire National Park or something like a Berkshire State Preserve? That's all the state lands are transferred either to the federal government or they become a state preserve, and it's legislated so it's statutorily protected. No forest in Massachusetts, no state forest is statutorily protected that I know of. From tomorrow, the agency changing its mind and deciding to clear cut the whole thing or whatever. There's no permanent protection for those. So, and I speak from having worked on the Maine Woods National Park proposal in northern Maine. We started in 1994. We heard all the reasons why we don't need that. We don't need a national park. This is the wood basket. We want to revive the forest products industry. We can save it. Since we started working on that proposal, the number of forest industry jobs in Maine has dropped by about 75%. Almost all of the paper mills have closed. Most of the timber, the sawmills have closed. The industry is on the skids, and there's no future, and there's no huge uptick in sight. That's going to be the same in Massachusetts. Massachusetts can't even begin to compare it with Maine in terms of the forest industry, yet Maine can't even revive theirs. They put a bunch of public money, subsidies, the legislature has passed laws trying to encourage the forest industry. It has done nothing. It's been a total waste of money. There's no reason to think that that's going to work in Massachusetts. And so yet, you've probably all heard about this national monument that was created in the Maine woods that was within the area we proposed as a big national park 20 some odd years ago. We were told it can never happen. This is a horrible idea. It's going to lock up the forest. It can't be used for anything useful. Well, pretty much now, almost all of the opponents, except for the governor, who's not all there, except for the governor, there's no major party anymore, including the original opponents who are speaking out saying we want to get rid of this. You probably heard about Donald Trump is looking at national monuments and getting rid of them. There's been an outpouring of people in Maine saying don't take our monument away. We want it. And the reason is because it's already helping the economy. People in those local towns, Millinocket, which has lost, 60% of its population in recent years. They had to close their library. They are starting to see business pick up. Real estate is starting to pick up a little bit. They've so far had more visitors this year to those towns than they normally have in a whole year. And it's all because of this monument, and they attribute it to that. So they did, they thought it could never work. A few people in Maine were willing to think big and supported this idea all along. More and more people learned about it as time went on. They started to see, wait a minute, compared with the alternatives, maybe this is not so bad. What are the pros and cons? And so anyway, I'm not here to sell a national park, but what I'm saying is, if you really seriously want to get tourism and revive the economy and make these places destinations and protect the forest, protect forests, the national parks don't allow logging. There's no logging in national parks. There are no pipelines. There's no wind power. There's no solar power. You can't mine it. You can't frack it. They take care of all the lands that were in the park. All of a sudden you wouldn't have to worry about that anymore at all. Next. So, again, I'm really not trying to sound preachy. This is just stuff that I think about all the time, so I apologize if I did, because I'm not here to do that. I'm really here just to give you food for thought. You folks are smart and knowledgeable, and you can make your own decisions, and I can't tell you what to do. But this really seems like a moment when you have a lot of options. And so I would just urge you to think through where you go forward from here, and think about all the options before you do. So I think that's one more. So thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.